go. All right, Chris. Thanks for joining us. My name's Christian. We met a while ago, but I've been brewing for maybe about 2 years now. I'm the social media chair for ZZ Hops, and this is something that we've been trying to do to get keep the club involved, but also give an opportunity for people in the industry to be able to touch base with people in a time when they can't. So we're really glad to have you here. If you could maybe share with us how you got to where you are now and your background and stuff like that, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, I know. I think this is a great platform. Excited when you messaged me, just because it's something different for sure. Started homebrewing in 2012. Got together with my partners late 2013. We spent most of that time, 2014, doing beer festivals, charity events, just giving away a ton of beer, trying to get our name out. That got us in touch with our first distributors, which then justified our business plan and let us actually raise the money we needed. Took over our building April 2014 and started doing construction and licensing, and brewed our first batch September 2015, and just been going since then.
Awesome. What could you maybe talk about your homebrewing background a little bit and like how long you were doing that before you got started in all this?
Not very long compared to a lot of people who start breweries. I got into it and did it because a friend of mine and former partner Aaron Bryant was into brewing, and then for me it was more visiting other breweries and realizing that not everything was on the same scale as Boulevard, that you could do something where you kind of create a community business and get to share what you do. And it was actually Cinderblock was one of the first breweries I visited that I kind of really dug the size of that scope. I happened to be there one night that Bryce was still doing like weekly tours, and got to meet him and talk to him a lot. And from there, I started reaching out to every brewery owner, brewer I could. Immediately found out that it's not like any other industry where you say, hey, I like what you do, I want to do it too. And they say, good luck figuring it out. It was, come over, let's have a beer, let's see what we can do to help you get started. So that was another big push for me to move forward.
Cool. Well, I know about you through some friends because I'm a band director here in Lee Summit, and I know you went to Lee Summit West. And if I understand correctly, you were in the band. Is that right?
I was in until junior. I quit before junior year. I had Harold and Thurmond were my teachers, and it was mostly just because of the mix between concert and marching band. I think if I was able to just do concert band, I probably would have stayed in it. But just being in high school and going to football games, it was just too much of a pull to do both.
Well, I'm good friends with Harold and Thurmond, and I told Harold that I was meeting with you today, so he says, what's up?
That's awesome.
He's actually, Thurmond sent me a picture of a homebrew that he and Harold did together. They did it a while back. They did like a winter warmer.
Okay.
So if you ever feel like touching base with them, I bet they get a good laugh out of that.
We were talking recently because I just dug my saxophone out of storage. That I'm surprised it was even in good shape, but I probably haven't played that in over 10 years.
Well, that's really that's cool to hear. If you want to, I'm actually a saxophone player, so if you want to talk about that sometime, we can chat.
Yep.
So we've kind of built some of the questions to start maybe on some of the more business side of stuff, and then talk about the beer creation side of stuff, and then we've got a rapid fire round here at the end. So maybe could you talk to us about like just building a brand for what you do? And it's kind of a question where I usually get a lot of follow-up, like what do I mean by that? And some people talk about building the community around the beer, or some people talk about, a certain aspect of what they do to be overarching above the beer, just different ways that you go about creating the brewery or the brand that is Crane and what you guys do.
I think initially when we started out, I think I would have told people to have some kind of a focus, that just a lot of the breweries I knew who were successful, that they didn't try and do everything, that they kind of found certain styles that they were comfortable with and that they identified with. But now I don't necessarily agree with that. I think the focus is making good beer and producing good beer, and making beers that you respect and appreciate and that want to be shared. So I think being honest about everything that you do, I think being very clear about what you're trying to portray and what you're trying to give with a certain beer that you produce and why you're brewing that beer. Yeah.
When you say like be clear about what you're trying to do, could you maybe talk about that a little bit more? When you say that, do you mean like if the core goal of what you're doing is to bring the community together and then beer's just that outlet? Like, what do you mean when you say focus on what you want to focus on?
I think you should have clear intent with every beer that you brew, why you're brewing it a certain way, what the story is behind it. I think there's some breweries who will, put out a beer that it doesn't feel special. It doesn't feel like, something that ties back to them.
Awesome. And if it ever feels like I'm not paying attention to you, I'm actually typing as you talk for people who aren't gonna maybe go out there and check out the video. So one of the things that we try and ask people, and everybody has a different story, is what you love about brewing, even now that you're in the commercial realm. There were obviously passions about it when you were home brewing, and what are you doing now to keep those passions alive, and what do you love about what you do?
I think for me, it's gone further to the side of community building. I think it's gone further of, connecting to other businesses, connecting to other people in the community. I don't get a brew like I used to. Just we went pretty quickly in realizing that there were people who were more talented at brewing and producing beers on a daily basis than we were. And I quickly got pulled away from the production side to handle other sides of the business. So I think for me, it is kind of taking each beer that we do and figure out some way to connect it to something else that makes it a bigger part of the community.
Yeah. What are some of the ways that you try and connect with your community?
So the latest big thing is we're actually starting a nonprofit. We're still figuring that out, but this big year we really pushed Crane Cares, and so that legitimizes, but also helps us kind of manage a lot of the philanthropic stuff that we do. So we're slowly trying to make the majority of beers that we produce tied to some local charity or organization. So Thunder Gong is a big one for us. That's the one we do with Jason Sudeikis and Steps of Faith Foundation. Monument this year was one we did in collaboration with the Pitch Kansas City, and that went to Harvesters. Champ Stamp that we did past football season was with a local Raytown guy who got the Champ Stamp tattoo, but then that beer was brewed to raise money for 15 in the Mahomes Foundation. So little things like that, but also ingredient-wise, there's a lot of things that we could buy online, that we could buy from vendors that are just, available easily. But if there's someone in Kansas City that's what they specialize in, so like one of our number one beers is T-Vice, and a friend of mine owns Hugo Tea Company, so we buy that directly from him just to kind of mix market both of our businesses.
Yeah, I love that tea. Like any of their teas is phenomenal. How about, you spoke about just how fast you got started in the commercial business from the home brewing business, and that's maybe not necessarily the typical path that people take to opening a brewery. But talk about maybe some of those steps that you took to open that brewery and to partner with people and get that dream started and progressing forward.
A lot of things had to fall into place. Like when I give the tours for the brewery, when I'm talking to people, it seems like things happen very easily, but we had to meet the right people. A lot of people who know me know I'm pretty outspoken, and so I've never had an issue if I needed an answer or I needed to figure something out to just ask somebody. The worst they can say is no. So I've always kind of jumped steps to get to where I needed to get. Partnering with Michael, who's one of my main partners. Originally, when I reached out to him, was because I had learned that he had several recipes similar to styles of beers that I enjoyed homebrewing. And not knowing as much about the business, I'm like, oh, well, he's already got award-winning recipes. That's going to translate immediately into, good selling beer. And it happens to be the same style beers that I like brewing. But it turns out he's an awesome guy beyond that. And he had, we had talked for a while about him being involved in some way in a brewery. Because when I first started looking, I actually was looking at where the Llewellyn's building went in downtown Lee Summit. And so I had gotten as far as, putting an offer on the building. And I came back to Michael's house probably a few months after we met just to show him the building and kind of what the plans were and talk to him. And he had said, well, actually, I have been talking to someone else, who's trying to convince me to open a brewery because I have a business that's unfortunately going out of business. And I'm suddenly going to have a 17,000 square foot building in Raytown that I don't know what I'm going to do with. And so that really changed my train of thought, because initially I was thinking a taproom brewery in a community that I knew well, which is Lee Summit, because I grew up in Lee Summit. And talking to Michael and the person he was working with, and then the partner I had at the time, and then Steve Hood was the first brewer we hired from Boulevard. We've got a bigger group of guys. How can we make this work on a reasonable scale for all of us? Let's go into distribution first. And so we kind of flipped it, and when we met with our first distributor and signed with them before we opened, that really changed our plans. So we just needed a big building to be able to put a lot of tanks in and have a spot where trucks could pick up our beer. So we started distro first December 2015 in Kansas, and then January in Missouri, and then we didn't open our tap room until a year later. So I always kind of wonder what would have been different had we gone the other route. I kind of think starting distro first helped us get our name out a little bit further, so that when we did open the tap room, we had people who were wanting to come visit. We started with bottle sales to go out of that building besides distro, and people were calling all the time, hey, when's your tap room open? We don't have a tap room. How can you be a brewery and not have a tap room? I don't know, we just are. So then we started doing tours and bottles to go, and then we opened a temporary tap room while we built the actual tap room. And so Eric, who's our head brewer now, actually started with us from pretty much the beginning. He started as selling bottles out of the front room, to working in the tap room, to being a pilot brewer, to assistant brewer, until now he's our head brewer. But we've gone through a lot of transitions as a team.
Yeah, you hit on a couple of things, and if you're okay with it, I'm going to ask you to dive in a little bit more on those. The first thing I'd like for you to talk about is, you mentioned partners and how you partnered up with Michael and several other people. Number one, how do you start those relationships? And number two, how do you maintain those relationships to continue to be something that's healthy and that continues to build the company up?
For us, it was because we all worked full time. We all came from different backgrounds. Most people, don't graduate from high school and immediately go into brewing, although maybe more so nowadays. I don't know. I came from veterinary medicine. Michael came from woodworking. My partner Jason is a CPA. One of our partners was a chemical engineer. Another partner was a geologist. And so us being busy and all having similar focus, we all knew what kind of beers we wanted to brew, what kind of brewery we wanted to be. Especially starting out, it let us all kind of fit into the roles that we were gonna ultimately assume. But we met every Sunday and just, what's next? What do we need to do next? What's the next step? Just kind of relying on each other, pushing each other forward. That was the biggest thing. And I think for any business that you want to start, I never planned on being a business person. I didn't go to business school. My first experience in running business was veterinary practices. And I think most people wanting to start something like this, you're taking that step of commitment. Like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to put my money in. I'm going to put my time in. I'm just going to do it. I think just kind of waiting for the right time doesn't happen.
So you suggest maybe more like, if you're going to dive in.
I think you have to. And I don't know that partnership is right for everybody. I know different breweries have had different experiences trying to make things work. my partners and I don't always agree, but we're for a sense married to each other. And so we just remind each other that we're in it together and we're going to figure out through it. That means we're fighting sometimes. But it doesn't work out for everybody. So Steve, who was a partner, who was our first brewer, his wife was an attorney and she moved to California. So he followed suit with her. Another partner who was with us ultimately wasn't what he thought it was going to be, especially coming from being a chemical engineer. He's making a lot more money as a chemical engineer than he would be in the beer industry. And another partner, it was just too much being a small business owner. It's a lot of stress, especially in beer. It's not a lot of money. You do it because you love it, and you do it because you're willing to put the time into it. So it's pretty much just me, Michael, and Jason now as managing partners. But then, of course, we've got a whole bunch of investors too.
Talking about those variety of partnerships that you have and relationships that you guys have to maintain, do you ever find that those have an effect on the creative aspect of what you guys make?
We try. I mean, we've definitely hit hits certainly on some of the things. Just more so, it's the balance always between what beers do we want to make versus what beers do we think we should make versus what beers other people are making that someone thinks we should make. We tend to, whenever we want to come out with new beers, we do it for the most part at the beginning of the year. We'll lay out, especially with distribution, we'll lay out our plan for the whole year, and then we'll add some more beers as we can through production. But we sit down, we talk about the beer style, we talk about what we want to add to it, we talk about the recipe, we talk about the label, the name, and so we work through pretty much all of that as a team. But there's still some issues sometimes.
You bring up a really interesting aspect about, you talked about production and looking at it a year ahead of time. I know you guys have your year-round stuff, or at least your seasonal stuff, and I'm wondering, you're the first person that we've interviewed that's talked about that year-long outlook on what's going to be produced from the brewery. Can you maybe talk about what that process looks like and how you guys come up with that schedule?
It's a lot of it has to do with distribution, and a lot of it has to do with our biggest distributor. They carry a lot of breweries and they carry a lot of beers from those breweries, and so it takes time to get beers into their system. We can't just say, here's a beer we want you to sell, come buy it. They need time to get it to their reps, to be able to talk about their accounts, to get it essentially pre-sold before they even bring it in, and so they need that plan pretty much up front. And so, especially in this last year, you've kind of seen where we'll do a lot of beers that we'll sell just at the tap room, and then we'll send them out of market. But a lot of them are such small batches, which in our case is 10 or 15 barrels. That's too small for us to send to our distributor in Kansas City. They basically say, they've got a lot of accounts to service. That's not enough to really allocate. So we'll sell it at tap room. We'll send it to St. Louis. We'll send it to Arkansas. We'll send it to other places. And it is a struggle sometimes because not all of our accounts understand that. We'll release a new beer and they're like, why didn't we get into that? It's like, it's tough. We get the beers that we can through our main distributor, and the rest go elsewhere. And then there's consumers who don't fully understand it about why we have it at the brewery but not in their store. It's like, oh, you can get it at the brewery. I mean, that's the most ideal for us as a small business, is if you come to the brewery more often and buy beer directly.
And and this may be outside of the realm of what you're able to talk about, but you talk about beers that you sell at the tap room and then beers that you sell at distribution. Is that something you guys try to determine, or is that something that the distributor determines for you?
They are pretty flexible as long as we get them the plans early enough. As long as we're not just trying to force a new beer down their throat last minute, they're pretty flexible. That will say, hey, this is what we're producing, this is what we want you to sell. And then we do kind of negotiate on quantities. If they're pretty understanding of what we want to do, but if I think we came at them at some very different style of beer or something, then they might want to be a little bit more lenient. Chance Stamp was a good example. That's one it's hard to tell. That's one we obviously branded for football season, and so they bought 300 cases, and then they wanted to buy more afterwards, and you can't tell. We didn't know the Chiefs were going to win, so we didn't know if we should have brewed more, and they didn't buy it all, so we gave it to other distributors. A lot of things I think other people don't realize is the government control on producing beer commercially. So they don't understand that the government says this beer can be brewed with these ingredients, put in this kind of package with this label, with this wording on it. And so you can't just necessarily produce whatever beer you want to do and immediately throw it on for sale. That's definitely my biggest issue with hindering creativity of breweries.
You talk about what's going to stay at the tap room, what's going to be distributed, and how that affects what you're going to make. Is there a program that you use to help plan out that long-term, brew day or brew period? Like, what are you guys using to make sure that you maintain that organization of what you're going to brew and when?
A lot of spreadsheets. We don't have brew software that we really use other than Beersmith. I kind of work with all our distributors and saying, this is what I've got coming down the pipeline. This is what we have. I'll keep them updated on inventory and what we're going to do, and that kind of gives them a plan. Essentially, we home market of what they have available. We give KC whatever they want, and then I trickle it down to our other distributors.
Cool. So maybe shifting gears just slightly, talking about the brewery, more as a whole. What would you say are maybe some of the biggest lessons you've learned, from the beginning to now? Some of the big things that you've taken away.
Man, I think probably the biggest thing is doing things in stages. Thank you, sir. Doing things in stages. So we have had the opportunity a few times where either investors or other people have offered us, some capital to kind of grow, and we've always said no. We just kind of want to do it as we do it. So like I said, starting the brewery, then adding the tap room, then adding more tanks, then the bottling line, then the canning line. So it's always kind of kept us at very tight, overhead and margins, but it's allowed us to do it without over expanding and without having, too big of loans over us. So I would say that's a huge thing. We've seen a lot of breweries struggle, especially recently, where the big boom happened across the country, and suddenly breweries who were doing all right selling beer to other markets just because it was different realized that they really needed to work harder to keep those beer sales moving out of market.
You mentioned bottling and then canning, and I know there's a big wave of almost the opposite starting to happen across the nation, where people are starting to can sour beers or even starting to can wild beers, and then instead of doing those large format glass beers, could you maybe talk about why you guys took the process of bottling before canning?
For us, it was because we did it all by hand initially. So we had a 6-head gravity wine filler from Italy is what we started on, and we'd have 8 to 10 people, depending on what we were doing, pulling bottles off a pallet, labeling, date coding, sanitizing, purging the CO2, filling the beer capping, and then putting it back on the pallet. And we put out, thousands of cases that way with just doing it by hand versus buying a bottling line right out the gate. We then bought our bottling line to be able to do 6-packs. We really didn't think we could afford a canning line just because of what was available at the time starting out. And because of a lot of the beers we were doing, we didn't know if we really trusted doing cans with a lot of the beers that we do, just because we do fruited sours and stuff with wild yeast. So that's why we always stuck with the heavier, Belgian bottles, the 750s, 375s, until we got a little bit more comfortable kind of making sure that everything was terminal before we packaged. And so that's probably one of my biggest things was a fear of kind of switching to cans and what could we do with cans. The first barrel-aged beer we did was the barrel-aged Crane de Noël. So it's just lactobacillus, but we put it in a barrel, so who knows what else could have gotten in there. We didn't add any Brett, so they were still concerned. But it sat in rum barrels for 27 months, 26 months. And so we were pretty sure it was good and done, and haven't had an issue. But that was probably the thing that made me the most nervous recently.
Yeah, we'll get into packaging and beer process in the next section, but since you're on that, I'm curious, are you guys pasteurizing before you go into those cans or into those bottles?
We don't pasteurize, we don't boil. So anything that's sour or wild stays sour or wild. And so we just make sure that it's done. We make sure that, it's at its final gravity. And we crash the heck out of everything, trying to get as clear a product as we can, trying to get as much of that yeast out of there as we can. We don't filter anything at this point either. But so that's probably one of my. It's not a big deal, and we've experimented more with doing lactose and fruited sours, just because I think that lactose sugar kind of brings back some of the richness, brings back some of the fruitiness that you lose when you ferment all those sugars. But especially in the last couple of years, you're seeing more breweries that are canning, and like I said, we're getting to packaging, but are canning fruited beers that are so sweet and they the whole thing they write on them, keep cold, drink fresh, and they come to us and like, why doesn't your fruit beer taste like this fruit beer? It's like, because it's finished. It's mostly because we're a distributing brewery. Like that's our biggest concern, is we don't know how long a beer is going to sit on the shelf somewhere at what temperature for.
Yeah, that's a smart way to go, so you don't have any issues with cans or bottles down the line. So the last question that we have about developing a brewery and maintaining a brewery, as far as the business aspect side of it goes, is about social media. And I know that you guys are out there doing really great stuff. Could you maybe talk about that social media presence and strategies you use to maintain that and to connect with people, to be able to bring them into the tap room or to the liquor store to buy what you guys are selling?
I think a lot of that, especially if you look at our original social media, because whoever was posting stuff, we try and have fun when we have time to, do some fun like photo setups and stuff. I wouldn't say we do a great job of kind of producing different media on the different platforms. So pretty much if you're following us on Facebook, you might as well be, it's the same stuff on our Instagram as our Twitter. Our Twitter is set to auto tweet, so I don't even really mess with Twitter. But again, I think it goes back to you are who you are, and be very honest about what you're doing in communication. And we've done some things where we will go back and fully explain, probably over explain why we're doing certain thing on social media. But we don't have a social media expert at all in the house. We don't have anyone who's actually good at tracking the algorithms or managing those things. So it's just us. Yeah,
can you maybe share a little bit about that, and then we'll get into the fun questions, which are all about brewing beer. But the marketing is kind of what you're hitting around, like how you guys market your beer and that kind of stuff. Like right now, I'm drinking 1 million watts, and like this label art is by Mike. Like how do you guys get paired up with your label artists? Are you guys sending that stuff out? Like what are you guys doing to market yourself, or is that something the distributors do for you?
We've got, especially with a lot of our old branding, a lot of the origami stuff, we've got a few people that have done different labels that we felt really kind of got the same vibe of what we wanted to do. A lot of the newer small batch stuff like 1 million watts and If Then are from Mike, and he's a tattoo artist who has worked with Eric, our head brewer. And so we figured, these are small batch. They're not necessarily going to hit full distro. We can be a little bit spread out and do a little bit different stuff with the art. One of our artists is the sister of an employee. One that has helped us for quite a while on different projects. So it's people that we know we can spend the time kind of going back and forth and saying, this is what we want. This doesn't work. This does work. The only thing we've really outsourced was the Thundergong label. The artist who worked with that foundation did that can label for us, and same idea. He really got what we were going for, but was able to put a lot more detail and a lot more of their elements into it.
Cool. Is there anything maybe you think that we should touch on about owning, developing, maintaining a brewery before we switch gears here?
Um, I think, yeah, I think as a brewery owner, I think you just have to be prepared to make sacrifices like any other small business. Um, you know, we've gone through stretches where I had no income. Um, we went through a long stretch for a while there because we were adding some more things that we needed the extra capital for. That I went like a year and a half that I Ubered and stuff and picked up other work, and so I think that surprises people. I think people think of breweries as just brewing money, and so yeah, it's really not something you should get into if you're planning on making a lot of money some days. Things are tighter than they used to be in the 80s, 90s, and and even 5 years ago. So it's got to be something that you love and something that you just enjoy doing and sharing. So I joke all the time that we do this because we enjoy brewing and sharing beer. If we can make it profitable, that'd be nice too.
Cool. Well, if I don't know if you need a beer, but this is a good chance to get a beer if you need one.
Okay. Refill. Cool.
Cool beans. Well, while I'm drinking 1 million watts, maybe talk to me a little bit about this one. I know. Is this the first fruited sour IPA you guys have done?
It's the second that we've done on a bigger batch. The first one we did was a collab with Narrow Gauge called oh god, um, Title Lock. Sorry, totally blanking. And that was a lime and orange zest one, but still a lot of fun. And I think we're going to turn 1 million watts into kind of a series, especially right now when we're trying to put out small batch stuff and we're not looking at having any distribution really for the foreseeable future. I think we're going to take that 1 million watt space and then kind of just mess with what we do to it.
Yeah, and if I know we're digging in on this right now just because I brought it up, but are you guys are you guys kind of treating this as you would like you talked about the base, like is the hop and the malt the same throughout all of them, and then how you're fruiting them is different each time, or what does that look like?
For this next one, it probably will be because we've got stock of those same hops. I don't think we'll bring anything else in, but it would be just two different fruits.
Cool beans. Yeah, so we'll dive into the fun stuff, creating beer, and this is I think through the questions that I sent out to you, this is where you'll see the greatest depth of questions and things like that. Maybe talk to us about what hops are you really vibing on right now? Is there one that you guys are really driving with that you're trying to throw in most of your stuff? I know contracts have a lot to do with that, but is there something that you're just really liking right now? Like in the homebrew world, we're talking about brew one right now, over and over. Is there something that you guys are doing at Crane that you guys really like right now?
Um, we are probably kind of struggling hop wise, just because we way over contracted on a lot of more basic hops that we thought we would be brewing a lot more. We thought we'd be brewing a lot more saisons, and so we had a lot lower alpha acids hops in stock. And so we're kind of working with our hop suppliers to fix that for the next year. But I don't know, Citra. That's like a cheating answer, right? El Dorado, I really like as a good dual-purpose hop. Mosaic, Galaxy. We went in the first couple of years. We went through a lot of Green Bullet and Dr. Rudy, especially Farmhouse IPA. That was one of the first year-round IPAs. We had about 10 different hops in that blend just because we didn't know what we were going to get a keep or what we were going to lose. And so that way we could just switch things out at a little less noticeably.
Sure. And then one of the things that we've been kind of on the hunt for is because everybody talks about hops first, is yeast. Like, is there a yeast that you guys are really enjoying using right now?
We use a lot of London. We use Chico. Um, we use DuPont for Farmhouse and Trailsmith. Um, Kvike, I have a lot of fun. We haven't done a whole lot with it, but the Hornindal Kvike yeast is pretty great just because it's got some flexibility and it does what it's supposed to. It's compared to some other strains, but
Yeah. So this kind of then you mentioned Kvike and London, and I'm imagining are those what you guys use on your hazies then?
the London.
Sorry, I'm still muted. Switching back and forth is tricky. Um, could you maybe talk about, I know Phase has been really popular with you guys. Champ Stamp was hazy as well, right?
It was a tank conditioned blonde ale.
Okay. So, one of the things that is taken over by storm is hazy IPA. Could you maybe talk about what you guys are doing? Talk about haze for a little bit. In that beer, what are you guys doing to make that really solid beer as far as hop combinations? And, if you're doing any mash regimens or anything like that to achieve that haze and that flavor.
So I can tell you, if anyone really wants to dig in on kind of how we've progressed New England IPA wise, hazies, I can get you in touch with Eric, because that's something I did not brew because they weren't a thing when we first started. And so he's really kind of learned and has studied and kind of fine tuned that. I definitely think, again, going back to hops though, that's something that we are hurting and trying to do our best on. It's just because we've got some older hops in stock. And so I think, as they get older, a lot of those oils and things have fallen off. So that's something we're working with. My big thing is again, I think when you're making any kind of beer style, it needs to be something that's stable. And so people are surprised that we crash the heck out of our hazy IPAs just like we do anything else. It was less concerned because that shouldn't be a factor. Yeah, I don't know. I think just it's a nice style that I fall in love with. I know I've got a lot of brewer friends who are more old school and to this day are still trash talking the style. But I don't think they understand what it takes to make a truly hazy IPA that won't settle over time. And they're a good introduction. Like my wife hates IPAs, but she likes the style because they can be very hoppy, but not bitter. So.
Yeah. Could you, and whatever you don't feel that you can share, that's fine. But like this round of Phase, could you maybe talk about what's going in there? You talked about haze stability, maybe what you guys are doing to achieve that. Can you speak to any of those points?
This batch, because this is something that we finished out through the quarantine. I know that Eric has worked on some other stuff for this recipe, so I don't think I can really talk to that.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's okay. Well, let's talk about stouts,
Yeah.
because I know like anniversary stout is always one that you guys are really spot on with. Can you talk to us like what are some of the points that you look for when you're creating those big stout recipes, and how you guys are achieving those?
So that's the first bigger imperial stout that we'd done at the brewery. It had like a 6-hour boil. It had a huge grain bill, but we did also add LME to it. And then we got the vanilla beans from a local vanilla supplier. But I think it's something that just, again, it takes the time to get the gravity on a beer like that.
What is your can you talk about like maybe recipe creation when you guys are going at that style of beer? Are there certain crystal malts that you guys are trying to throw in at that, or what are you guys looking for?
Oh, I couldn't tell you what specifically we did on that one. That was a base style that we had turned from a former brewer, Reynolds, that's now at Alma. So if you're enjoying Alma stouts, there's a good reason why, is because Reynolds is pretty amazing.
A couple weeks ago, Kevin Olson asked this question, but do you know if you guys are reoxygenating after a couple days of re-fermentation on those bigger stouts?
We don't.
Cool. And then how does maybe a stout that's destined for a barrel change from a stout that's not destined for a barrel? Are you guys doing anything different for those?
Not in particular on stouts. I think it depends on, for a lot of the beers that we barrel age, it depends on what you're going for and what you're going to add to it. Sir, I'll be up there in a sec. Love you. Got a naked 3-year-old running around.
We could edit that
out. Yeah, so I think something we learned pretty early on was just trying to hit the right amount of non-fermentability. So a lot of like the early saisons that we did, that we barrel aged, just especially if we were going to hit them with Brett or another mixed culture. We initially filled a lot of our barrels with a similar base to just what was our original saison, which became Trailsmith. And so obviously over time in the barrel, those just thinned out like crazy. They just, over attenuated. Brett chewed up everything. And so that was something we had to learn, was just making sure we were going a little bit higher on mash and creating those longer chain sugars, giving something a little bit harder to digest. But
yeah, and that kind of transition's nice, because a big thing that will probably, like the next big chunk will probably be about sours or Brettanomyces fermentations. But you talked about higher OGs. Is there a mash regimen you're following to achieve those, and can you share a little bit of insight on that?
Right, that's something I couldn't really tell you. I mean, I can tell you that we do have in our system, we're able to do step mashes on different beers, but I couldn't tell you exactly what we've done, just especially because we've done so few stouts. Omar is a year-round porter, and it's got probably the biggest thing with that one is it's only 6%, but we add a ton of oats to it, and it gives a little bit more body. But we haven't done a whole lot of stouts of any size.
Okay.
Other than, I would say the only other one would be Illuminati, and that's the sour stout we did, which great profile. Not as big as Anniversary, but that came with mixed reviews, especially because we released it shortly after the infection at Goose Island. So then trying to explain to people that we intentionally soured a stout was a lot of fun.
Sure. Well, let's talk about sours for a little bit, and give us, if you could, just like a few points about how you come up with formulating a good sour recipe, whether it's destined for a barrel or not.
I think one of the things that stands out about our sours is, like I said, we don't boil them, so we let them get as sour as they want. So for somebody who really, really likes sours, I think that helps. The other thing is, most of our sours that we do are just our similar base, Berliner Weiss or Gose. So it's just wheat and two-row. It's very clean, just lemony sourness. So it's a good gateway, and then it also tends to go well with anything we want to add to it, whether dry hopping or fruiting. So I think when a lot of people, we discuss sours, we discuss that sour beer is as broad as saying, like, I like dark beer. What do you like? Stouts? Do you like sports beer? Do you like black IPAs? If sour beer, it just means that you soured it. And again, for most of our sour beers, we're using a few different lactose strains, so it's just that really clean, some pineapple notes, really lemony. We'll have people come to us and say, I had Love Child, and I didn't like that, but I liked your sours. Well, they're two very different sours. You're missing that funk element. You're missing a lot of that barrel character. So we've had some fun. One of my favorite things to do is when we've done blends as well. We did a fun beer with two of these guys, the Junipucker, and that was really interesting because that's when we did the hop tea, essentially. We hit it later with hops just because lactobacillus, at least the strains we use, are very hop intolerant. I mean, we basically had just enough hops in those beers to make them beers. So they've got like an IBU of 0.5. And then getting into the sour IPAs is kind of another fun mix, getting to a point where we're getting a little bit more control over the pH.
Yeah. Since I'm drinking 1 million watts, if we can maybe talk about sour IPAs for a minute. Is that a single stream beer, or are you blending beers to create that profile?
Nope. So that's a single beer. We made a few different beers when we were still homebrewing. We haven't done it as much at the brewery, but one that we really liked doing was called Saison Acidité, which is not a very good name, just acidic Saison, but it was one where we just took our Saison and then Berliner Weiss and blended it together. But I think you get that more balanced tartness that I'd like to see more of.
And, if we're talking about, maybe more straight ahead kind of sours, is there a pre or a post fermentation pH numbers that you're looking for on those?
A lot of our Berliner Weisses and Goses, they get, like, to me, like 3.3, but they'll get down to 3.2, 3.29. Gooseberry Gose has a much more perceived tartness just because gooseberries are sour as heck to start with. It just also, we've struggled a lot early on where those beers were taking 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks or more to finish. And we had to learn pretty quickly about when we were going to pitch the yeast and how close to, pitching the bacteria that we pitch the yeast to kind of give the yeast time to finish stuff before it got so acidic that the yeast couldn't do anything. So that was something we learned throughout the first year of brewing.
And what does that look like on your guys' process? Like, are you guys putting that into stainless and then letting it sour and then throwing the yeast on it, or how are you guys doing that?
We do it pretty close. So we'll throw the lactose or lactobacillus in there first, and we'll give it maybe a day, and then we'll pitch the yeast.
Cool. And I know you mentioned a couple of strains that you're using for lacto. Is there any other information you would like to share with us about that process on the home brewing side? What we could maybe do to emulate some of that?
We get our I mean, I think you can buy the same Omega pitch from of their lactose strains, and just if you're wanting to get things going a little bit faster, you're able to do it at a little higher temperature without any real concern. When we were doing it as homebrewers, we were actually heating the beer, so we actually would put a space heater around it and wrap it in blankets to get it going pretty quickly. And I honestly, we're pretty happy with that strain. Before this, we were doing a lot of lacto built up from grains that we would just pitch on top and heat it and let it go. We couldn't find any initially commercial strains. We tried a lot of like the yogurt test. We couldn't find any that we were super crazy about. And so when we found that one available from Omega, we kind of fell in love.
So you're not heating or maintaining a temp as you're souring?
Nope. We'll send it in just under 100 and let it go.
And then beers that you're doing with Brettanomyces, are you primary fermenting those as Saccharomyces, or are you doing Brett all the way through?
Most of the ones we've done will do primary and Saccharomyces. When we first started, a lot of our Brett beers, other than barrel-aged stuff like Small Ball or Amber and Brett, those were all just bottle conditioned with Brett. So we dosed them with Brett right at packaging, just because initially we were concerned about it getting anywhere else in our line. We've done 2 pilot batches, one of them with Clay Camp that was 100% Brett. So that's really the only ones we've done. We want to do some more experimenting. We've joked from the get-go that if we became an all Brett brewery, that wouldn't be the absolute worst thing, but it would have to change the plans.
Yeah, well, and I imagine that would extend time periods on certain things. So, if we're talking about barrel-aged sour beers or barrel-aged Brettanomyces beers and stuff like that. Can you maybe talk about your process in general? Like, are you doing a different mash regimen for those that are going to go into a barrel? Are you fermenting in stainless in primary and then racking to a barrel? What does that process look like?
We are doing higher mashes, trying to keep a little bit more dextrins, a little bit more unfermentables, some adjunct spelt, rye, oats, something in there that's a little bit chewier. For the majority of them, we will ferment in stainless first, and then we'll move them to barrels. There's only been 2 beers that we've done 100% barrel fermented, and that was Nostalgia, and then 3 now, Nostalgia, Township, and then we did a collab with Central Standard that we've got aging now that was barrel fermented.
When you're doing those barrel ferments, I know that like obviously trying to reuse that barrel can be a challenge, but how are you guys overcoming some of the things that you can face when you ferment in a barrel?
We're pretty hard pressed, especially now because we suck at checking our barrels on a regular basis. We maybe check them once a month, and we'll check gravity and pH and just profile. But the idea of doing right now, doing a clean barrel aged beer for us is, unless we get somebody in there to really take care of it, I don't think we'll do it. Most of the beers that we've barrel aged, if it's a new beer, we've got an idea of what we want the type of barrel to be for profile. So if we get a fresh wine barrel, spirits barrel, most of everything we've gotten locally, other than the rum barrels, we went through a broker to bring those in. But we're fortunate enough that we're not doing, a brewery might do a bourbon barrel stout. They'll use the barrel once, maybe twice, and get rid of it. We've used our barrels over and over and over again, especially with the mixed culture. We empty it and throw more beer in it. It just takes off that much faster. It's a little environment.
Are you guys doing Soleras on those, or are you doing like full transfers and then just pitching a brand new beer in there?
Full transfers.
Cool. And then for those sour beers that are destined for a barrel, what indicators are you looking for to let you know that it's ready to go into wood?
Mostly that it's dropped enough gravity that it's not going to be a huge mess. We've done with the barrel fermented ones we've done. We've planned on them being in the brew house area because we've got drains, but it's mostly once we know it's hit a level that we feel safe that we can put it into our barrel program.
And if you don't mind me digging in a little bit more on that, what gravity are you looking for before it hits a barrel?
It just kind of depends on the beer, and it kind of depends on what we're fermenting it with. So if we're gonna quickly add bread or another mixed culture, I don't know, 10:06, 10:05.
Cool. And then what would you recommend on the home brew level? Like if people are starting to think about getting into wood aged sour beers, how would you recommend they go about that?
So in that scale, we did do a lot of Solaris. So especially like a lot of the Berliner Weisses we did early on, we'd pitch, if weren't too many we pitched Brett, but because we were building up from grain, we knew there was Brett and whatever else was in there. And so some of the bigger vessels that we were fermenting on, starting out, we would pull half and then refill with fresh and just let that keep going. We did the same thing on a few. We had like a Flanders Red and an Oud Bruin and some other. We did a few Creeks and Framboise. All the kinds of beers we thought we would be doing a lot more of now as a brewery that we just don't have the time to develop like we thought we would.
And, talking about Solera, and this is fresh on my mind because I just broke into a sour beer, a mixed fermentation sour beer that I've been doing for about 6 months. Say, like, if somebody's going to Solera their beer, how do you recommend that they go about, like, if they're realizing that it's going too sour, how do you recommend that they turn that beer back in the direction that they want if they're going to Solera that project?
We've never been good at that. Again, we just kind of let the bugs do what they're going to do. It's more for us, it's kind of a ratio of how much we would pull off of it. So if it's getting a lot more sour, kind of giving it back a more finished beer when we refill it, and maybe taking more out of it that time, so that the rest of it doesn't, the pH that's already there doesn't affect the rest of it.
Cool. Okay, so we're gonna kind of shift gears, unless there's anything you want to talk about as far as sour or barrel-aged beers.
I've just been surprised. I think I've talked to a lot of people about it. They're still some of our favorite beers to produce. But I think that the market has greatly changed since we first started. A lot of the breweries that are really well known for it, Crooked Stave and Jester King and Jolly Pumpkin, Anchorage, they still do a good job. But even breweries like Boulevard and Saison Brett, which is a solid Brett beer, they didn't even brew it last year because they had so much stock from before. So I just think the ultimate, the newer craft people getting into craft beer, just not their first go-to as much anymore. So I think sharing those styles with people and kind of finding local options is really important.
Cool. Would you be? I don't know if you guys are doing any of this. I'm sure you are. But are you guys doing any blends? And how do you recommend? Like people who are looking into getting into blending beer, how do they go about that?
We haven't done a lot of blending. Just for most of what we've brewed, we've had the intention for the total volume. Now that our barrel program is where it is, I think a lot of what we do next, just because a lot of the barrels that we filled up are just, some are straight Berliner Weiss, some are straight like Rosette that we've done before that we knew would be good to age. So I think we've got more options that we will be doing more blending as we package more of our barrels.
Cool. So maybe having a few stock blends that you can go to and blend that into a different beer would be a way you recommend going about it. Awesome. So here comes, I think these are the questions that the brewers like the most over the past couple of weeks. So the first one is maybe one that they haven't, but what beer trends have you seen that have had the greatest impact on your brewery? Just what you guys are putting out.
That's a good question. No, I think some of the stuff that we haven't had any experience, don't know a lot about. I mean, obviously seltzers. We're looking at some stuff that I just saw a post from James from Brewdog put out about their new whole line of non-alcoholic craft beers. I think it's just kind of like the stuff on the side that we aren't as familiar with. And I'm kind of curious to see where it will go. Obviously, in the last couple of years, hazy IPAs, milkshake IPAs, mimosa IPAs. I'm enjoying the appreciation of fruited beers. I think for when I first got into craft beer, there were a lot of people that just didn't understand what a fruit beer could be, that it doesn't all have to be extracts and syrups. And so I think the brewers who take the time to use real fruits or source it, I'm enjoying seeing a lot of that everywhere.
You talked for a second there, going back to your homebrewing days. What do you think is maybe something that homebrewers might be overlooking to brew really consistent good beer?
I think just kind of really evaluating and taking notes of what they're doing each time. Having fun with recipes and changing little things to see what the outcome is. A lot of the smash beers are a lot of fun to kind of get started. We did a lot of similar things with different yeast when we first started homebrewing, where we'd brew the same base beer and split it and just put different yeast on it to see what kind of yeast profiles we liked, if all the other variables were the same. But it's been a learning curve with everyone else. I remember my first batch of beer, we didn't hit the right volume, and so we just added water out of the tap to it, because that seemed like what you're supposed to do. So it's just, I just think always kind of learning from each brew.
Cool beans. All right, so this is the rapid fire section. This is kind of, we're wrapping up a little bit. So this is meant to be like very little thought. Ask a question, uh, tell me. I'll try and get it written down, but I might be a little slow. Favorite non-KC brewery?
Oh, see, Central Standard.
Coolest tap room?
Um, Outside of KC or in general?
It could be wherever.
I think New Glarus is pretty cool.
Favorite beer of all time?
I really like our small ball. I think it's just it probably hits all the right spots for me.
Favorite non-malt, non-hop ingredient?
Ooh. Sorry, this isn't very rapid fire. Some kind of citrus, vanilla.
Most underrated beer style?
I think we have a lot of fun with like a grisette, sour or not, barrel aged or not. I think a grisette is kind of a great underappreciated style.
What's getting you excited about beer these days?
Um, Hopefully it continues, but I think just kind of the local support, um, more and more people being interested in craft beer, and more people jumping into it with different levels of understanding, whether they have any interest in homebrewing or not. So I think more and more people who realize that they have a neighborhood brewery, within miles of where they live, I think is pretty cool.
This is the last rapid fire question. Beer trend that you wish would have held on?
Ooh, I think Brett beers. Like I said, I know obviously they're still relevant, they're still a thing, but I think I wish they were a bigger thing.
Cool. Well, Chris, this is really where you get to talk about what you guys are doing now. What's coming up at the brewery that you want to share? I know you guys have been involved in Together We Can, and trying to make the best of difficult situations. But are there projects that are coming up in the future that you're getting really pumped about? Just talk to us about what you guys are doing and what you want to share with us.
We we are like everyone else, just kind of taking it week by week. Um, Things are very different. Like I don't want to get depressing. This is a good chat anytime, but I think it puts more focus on again like how slimly a lot of breweries run, and when you take out elements of their normal production, how things can get scary pretty quickly, especially if you've built a good team that you want to take care of. So we are in a weird spot where we are trying to keep up with some core beers just in case our distributors decide to order some. But also, this is a good time to try and put out some new stuff and try and get approvals through, um, that we can kind of focus more on the tap room. If that's our main source of income right now, that we're going to try and do some more things that are only available at the tap room and limited can releases. So some of that may be totally new beers. Some of that may be beers that we've done before. We've just never canned them and are kind of bringing them back to the forefront. But we're trying to be creative with what we have available right now. The batch of beet vice we just did wasn't a new batch of beets. There's no red sugar beets available right now. That was our previous batch that we held keg stock for the tap room to last us for some time. But since we can't do it that way, we decided to turn all those kegs into cans. We're probably going to do the same thing with a few other beers. And I had conversations with distributors today, kind of balance and help them out. If they're willing to place an order soon, I will buy back some of their kegs that we can then turn into cans and then hopefully sell back to them if they'll make those commitments. So just trying to stretch everything that we can right now.
That's got to be really tricky to manage that.
It's definitely different. Our team has shrunk quite a bit. We've got our two brewers that are luckily able to start brewing again. Nowhere near our normal production, but at least we're able to fill a few tanks. And then Christina, our general manager, is basically holding down the fort since we're all mostly self-quarantined. And trying to figure out what we can do there. We've had some success doing a beer membership at the tap room, where basically it's community-supported brewing, which a lot of breweries do, regardless of this time, where they spend money up front, they get a discount to then get beer later. We were in the process of starting self-delivery, and then we ended up backtracking on that. Thanks to beautiful people like Mackenzie Lamkin. And Together We Can, that's been a lifesaver for us to kind of have a consistent burst of money every couple weeks. So, yeah.
Well, before I finish up my portion and then unmute everybody and they can ask their own questions, is there anything you'd prefer for us to maybe edit out before we put this up on the YouTubes?
I don't think so.
Cool. Well, let me stop recording and I'll unmute people and we'll see if they have any questions for you. They will. So.